You know how sometimes you have an idea that you know is bad, but you do it anyway? So I initially had this idea a few months ago. I was working on something in my garage and I saw a few broken crayons sitting in the house, and I thought, I wonder what would happen if I melted and inlaid these in some wood. In fact, this shot is my initial test from that day. Flash forward a couple months, I'm in my new shop, I finally got things mostly organized, and now I can give it a real shot. So if I'm being honest, I was probably about 75% certain that this would work at all. Actually, that's not true. If you asked me to break it down beforehand, I would have said that there's about a 5% chance that it'll go flawlessly, a 5% chance that it'll completely fail, and a 90% chance that it'll work out, but that there will be some compromises along the way. A few bumps and bruises, and maybe a couple of regrets. Kinda like life. Oh, and naysayers. Let me save you the trouble. This is a terrible idea. It's impractical, it's gimmicky, it's arguably a waste of wood, but it was also a lot of fun. And that's worth something. A lot, actually. So far you've just been seeing me mill up my walnut and prep it for gluing into one larger slab. Here I'm overusing some dominoes because I want to make sure that both of the boards stay perfectly coplanar after I glue them up. After it was dry, I took one more really light pass on the planer, and that was really just to get rid of any glue squeeze out. So this one board is going to give me the top and both of the legs. So what I'm doing in this shot is sort of dividing it into sections so that I know where each of the break points is going to be. That way I can plan out where I want my cran river to flow, where I want it to stop and start and so forth. The next thing I did was take a Sharpie and roughly trace out said river. Then my first idea was to use the edge of my sander to start carving out the path. And as you're going to see in the next shot, I ended up abandoning this method. But the reason that I went with it is that I thought it was going to come out looking more natural. But it was kind of slow, so I figured I'd just route it instead. And this worked fine. It has a sort of planned, organic look that feels random enough. While my main river was cooling, I decided to play around with blending techniques on some plywood. There was a definite middle ground that I was going for. I wanted the colors to blend a little, but not too much. Kind of like a marbling where any two meet. Also, if you watch closely here, you can actually see the wax turn back into a solid. Kinda cool. Once my wax was significantly solid, I came back with a card scraper and removed anything that spilled over the edge. And you can see in this shot that the wax actually sits below the top of the wood. And the reason for that is that I thought it would be easier to get everything level with the planer rather than by hand. And I'd rather remove wood with the planer than wax. Going through the planer caused one little blemish, but luckily it's pretty easy to repair this stuff. And I can hear what you're thinking. Why not leave the cran wax low and do the top in a clear resin or epoxy? So I actually tried that on a test piece, and it ended up causing more problems, at least for me. What it ended up doing was pulling up the wax entirely. And I think you could get around that if you did a really thick coat of epoxy, but that would have a totally different look, so I don't know, maybe for another day. Alright, now let's turn this thing into a table, or a waterfall coffee table more specifically. Actually, that might not be technically correct. But in any case, a table where the grain stays consistent, where it transitions from top to leg. And doing this is pretty simple to explain, but it'll be even easier with an animation. So basically I'm going to cut a pair of bevels where the legs meet the top. Then on one of the legs, we'll flip it around and back bevel it. And then do the same to one end of the top. After that, we can tilt our blade back up to 90 degrees and cut our legs to their final length. And then we can assemble it all. So this pretty much all went exactly as planned, except that cutting wood generates heat, and heat melts wax. So this is where the one major blemish of this table occurred. But we'll try to fix that later. Try being the operative word there. Now, this clamping situation might look a little weird, but what I'm doing is using the tape method that you've seen me use plenty of other times, and then using a strap clamp and some squares to apply pressure to make sure that the joints are at 90 degrees. After it was dry, I came back and reinforced these with some dominoes. And you could definitely get by without this, but I had an idea for an extra little color pop by shortening the dominoes and burying them below the surface, and then filling in the mortise with some more cran. And while I'm doing that, let's take a minute to thank this week's sponsor, ExpressVPN. So if you're not familiar with a VPN, it stands for Virtual Private Network, and people use them for all sorts of reasons. Personally, I like that ExpressVPN protects me against snooping, interference, and censorship, and allows me to unblock content by hiding my IP address and changing my virtual location. Sound too technical? It's not. For example, say I want to change my location to Milan, Italy. Here's how I do it. Now, VPNs aren't mandatory for life on the web, but having one definitely gives me a lot more peace of mind. And some of the advantages of ExpressVPN are they have the fastest speeds, server locations in 94 countries, 24/7 customer support, apps for Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, Linux, routers, and more. It's super easy to connect and disconnect. They have the best in-class encryption, and you get it all for less than $7 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. And actually, if you go to expressvpn.com/Foureyes, you can get 3 months for free with a 1-year package. So again, that's expressvpn.com/Foureyes. Take back your internet privacy today by typing it in or just clicking on the link in the description. All right, thanks ExpressVPN. The next thing that I decided to do was use my branding iron to deboss my logo. And then I wanted to fill that up with some more crayon wax. Turns out that sanding ruined that idea. I think it was just too shallow and thin. After that, I tried to fix the problem area at the corner by melting some cran into it and then scraping it flat. And this didn't really work. That said, I don't doubt that it could. I was sort of worried about overworking things at this point, so I figured best to just live with the gap than to make things worse. After that, I was on to sanding and finishing. And when you sand, it's going to really dull the crayon. But after you put on your Maker brand Simple Finish with wax, it'll come right back to life. One of the most important processes, or activities, that enables growth, at least in my opinion, is experimentation. That is, when you have an idea, be it good or bad, you have the luxury to explore it and see where it might lead. And that was something that was really missing from my life a few months ago. Because of working full-time while simultaneously trying to meet all the deadlines in my upload schedule, I couldn't really play with things. Basically, knowing that any misstep could set me back a couple of days meant that I couldn't afford myself any missteps. In other words, the freedom to fail. And of everything that's changed for me, that arguably could be the biggest difference maker in wherever I end up in a few months or a few years from now. It really feels like, for the first time in my life, anything that I want to do or try, I crayon. Special thanks to Josh Logue, Brent Young, Andrew Hayden, Robin Mohammed, Andreas Spilotis, and the rest of my Patreon members for making these videos possible. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be able to do a lot of the things that I'm doing. Experimenting with stupid ideas like melting crayons into a table. I wouldn't have the confidence to do it because I wouldn't have the freedom to fail. So thank you for giving me that freedom. And if you want to find out how you can support the show too, just click the Patreon link in the description. And as always, no pressure. All right, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.